If you procrastinate anything like I do, you probably put a task off for days only to randomly decide to do it one evening without much resistance at all. And I've always assumed that the difference was discipline, but while doing something kind of mundane recently, some organizing, I started wondering if I've just been asking myself the wrong question all along. Hi everyone. So, this is another video essay diary entry number, I think 4. But recently I've been thinking about accountability and the weight that we carry with it. So, like being told while growing up to hold yourself accountable, stay disciplined, be consistent. But how do we maintain that when it doesn't always seem to come naturally to us? So, like, what actually convinces you something is worth doing if no one is giving you a deadline or telling you to do it, when the only person to let down is yourself? I don't think most of us really struggle because we don't know what needs to be done. Usually we know. Like, I'm well aware when I need to take care of the doom piles in my room, or get rid of the clothes that I don't wear, or answer my friend's text from a couple moons ago, or even just when I should put some time towards the hobbies that I care about, like writing, for example. Yet the sheer amount of things that we have to maintain in our lives can leave us just feeling overwhelmed and frustrated that we're never really caught up, almost like it's a never-ending battle. And that brings up a question that I've been thinking about, is why do some days it feels impossible to do something, whereas another day the exact same task feels actually manageable to do? There's a gap between the knowing what to do and actually doing it or executing a plan. And I could go on a tangent about the zone of proximal development, but I will spare any listeners. So a few weeks ago I did something that brought up these questions in my head, and it was literally the simplest thing, but it provided me some food for thought. So I filmed my last video in a different context from what I had been doing up until that point. And when I say different, I don't mean like just the content. Like, I mean, I didn't overanalyze everything and write out a script beforehand. I just filmed it on the fly, which I haven't really done before. I mean, this is all kind of new for me. Pretty straightforward. Okay, so the video was just me literally vacuum sealing my sweaters. Wasn't meant to be a productivity experiment, nor was I planning on filming that day, because usually I deliberate over ideas for way too long first anyway, hence this being like a month after the fact. But I think that's kind of how it accidentally became an experiment, at least the way that I think about it. So for context, my room was a mess, which it tends to feel that way. And the environment can tend to make it difficult to want to write. And rather than forcing myself to do it, it just made more sense to record myself doing something that I had been putting off as a way to just motivate myself to do it. So just to like make it a little bit different, spice it up a little bit. And really it ended up just giving me some inspiration to make this video, which again I wouldn't have otherwise. But really what it made me think about was just why that particular method worked, because the task itself didn't change. I still didn't want to organize my winter clothes. It's like the last thing I would want to do is organize any of my closet. And again, I just didn't want to do it. Like, I literally only put away like 2 bags worth, but filming it made it feel lighter and more grounding, to say the least. So I guess I want to just dig a little deeper as to why did that work. Because it's, again, not that interesting that I put away sweaters. I could have been doing the dishes or cleaning out my car. Whatever it was doesn't really matter. I guess what I'm interested in is, why does adding one small creative element make something that I'd been avoiding suddenly feel a lot more approachable? So maybe it was the novelty of doing something differently, or maybe the camera made it feel like someone else was in the room even though I was by myself. And maybe just adding a little flair to an otherwise ordinary task made it a little more worthwhile. I don't think really any one of those is the answer, yet together they kind of changed my relationship to the task. Because at the time I couldn't create the way I normally would create, so I created differently. And instead of treating the task like another, I guess, obligation to get over with, or just the chore that it was, the camera, I guess, in a sense, turned it into an experience that I was participating in. It wasn't about being productive anymore. It was about paying attention to what I was doing. It almost gave me permission to let an otherwise forgettable moment be worth noticing. I guess to look at something ordinary with like a little bit more curiosity than I typically would have. I think that's what changed. I wasn't really forcing myself to do the task anymore. I was actually engaging with it and enjoying it. And really, it even shifted how I was talking to myself during the process, which I didn't really go into the video with any plan or intent of talking to myself nicer. It just kind of came out that way. And I guess whenever it's private, it's easy for our internal dialogue to become harsh. But whenever there is the perceived somebody watching it, even if I would have never posted it, it was a lot harder to slip into my usual stream of self-criticism when it's being documented. I mean, even now it's like I'm trying to choose my words a little more carefully than, say, if I was just in my room by myself, not filming myself. So I became a lot more aware of what I was saying. It felt kind of uncomfortable to let that negativity exist on camera. Almost like whenever maybe you have friends over, like at your parents' house or something, and maybe your parents will be a little bit nicer whenever they're around versus like when it's just you. And I guess instead of nagging myself during this process, how I usually would, by saying like, why haven't you done this yet? Or why are you doing it that way? I found myself thinking, let's just see what happens if I just start. Even if it is literally filming a boring task. But it diverts the instinctive criticism into curiosity. Because criticism just makes us want to escape a task. Whereas curiosity is a lot more motivating and encourages us to want to stick with it. And I think a part of what made that possible was, again, something really simple. I wasn't rushing through it in my head. Like, yeah, it took a lot longer doing it that way than if I would have just done it without a camera involved. But it meant that I was actually there while I was doing it. And that made a big difference. And honestly, I was surprised that I enjoyed filming it unscripted. I'm a big overthinker, so I always go into things like, I need to do this exactly the right way and plan everything accordingly. But in this case, I was just like, whatever, I'll just do this. I don't have to post it. If I do, cool. If I don't, it doesn't matter. But I don't know. I guess it sounds a little ironic because filming yourself is usually like a self-indulgent type of thing, or at least that's how I've kind of thought of it as. But for me, the camera just kind of pulled me out of my own head. So again, instead of overthinking, I was just more present in what I was doing. It narrowed my attention. Instead of constantly looking for the next distraction as an escape, which I tend to do in my free time, I became a lot more invested in what was happening right in front of the lens, which was myself in that moment. So it created a different sense of awareness. It made the experience feel less isolated, even though obviously no one was there. So I guess for anyone else who struggles with getting distracted, it's hard to want to finish something in its entirety, yet the novelty and having that additional task made it a lot more difficult to fall victim to doing other things or getting sidetracked from what I was doing. I had a lot stronger of a desire to see it to completion first, which it kind of sounds counterintuitive because I pretty much made more work for myself to something that, again, is a very simple thing to do, but it was no longer boring, and I think that is a big difference. And coming back to the idea of accountability and discipline, I guess what I want to ask again is why do I assume discipline is what's missing when I don't want to do something? Or rather, why are we quick to conclude that we need more discipline instead of asking ourselves, what would make the task easier to engage with in the first place? We're very quick to criticize ourselves or assume that we aren't trying hard enough. It's like, why am I not able to do like this simple task? It's literally something that could take maybe 10 minutes to do or 15 minutes to do. But rather, the better question is, how do we reconnect ourselves to it? How do we make it interesting enough to want to follow through? Even if the answer is as silly as just recording yourself doing it. It's almost like having an invisible body double in the room. And I really don't think accountability always has to be about discipline at the end of the day. Sometimes it's just about making something more manageable. So again, that could look like body doubling with a friend as well. It doesn't have to be recording yourself. Or having a checklist, listening to music, or eating a meal while you work. I know for me, I struggle to take breaks without losing all of my momentum. So I might just eat like standing up while in between like 5 different tasks. Because if I sit down and like eat a full meal, like I'm done for the rest of the evening. I don't want to do anything else. And in this case, it was just faking accountability with a camera, I guess vacuum bags, and an excuse to talk to myself more. I didn't really just become more disciplined from one evening of cleaning. I mean, I haven't really touched anything in my closet since then besides tossing out the humidity bag. And it didn't really encourage me to do any more organizing either, yet I think it's unfair to measure its worth by that outcome or lack thereof, because again, it wasn't really meant to be a productivity hack. It was finding out how to make an otherwise avoidable task that would just get lost in my to-do list, how to make that feel approachable enough to actually do it. And it eliminated at least some visual clutter that I was looking at every day, even if it was just a little bit. Sometimes it's not easy to tell ourselves, I get to do this thing. Sometimes that's like a piece of advice that, I've been given, and while it sounds nice in theory, it's not always doable to just will ourselves into that mindset. After filming that, I kind of thought a little bit more about what I went over, and I think that accountability isn't just holding ourselves to a standard. I think it's about how we help ourselves meet that standard. And no one else can really answer that for us. We have to be willing to experiment, notice what actually works for us, and keep asking better questions instead of assuming the answer is an idealized version of more discipline in our lives. You are still responsible at the end of the day, but that responsibility can be to understand yourself better, not to judge yourself more harshly. So, what actually helps move us from I have to I get to? That's the important part, is that transition. And maybe it's not more discipline, but finding a different way to meet ourselves where we already are. Or more simply, creating the right conditions to make the task easier to start in the first place. I say that now, and I'm probably going to forget about this and just convince myself that I need to try harder, but hopefully I'll remember to experiment a little bit before criticizing myself too much for procrastinating. But otherwise, it is way past my bedtime, so thank you for watching.